The front door of the diner hit the wall so hard that the little bell above it snapped clean off and landed somewhere behind the counter. Nobody moved. Not the woman in the corner booth with her coffee halfway to her mouth. Not the old man at the far end of the counter with his newspaper folded in his lap. Not even the cook in the back, who had heard the bang and gone absolutely still the way animals go still when they sense something wrong in the air. 3 men walked in like they owned the floor under their feet. Marcus Hale was behind the counter, drying a mug with a white cloth. He did not look up right away. He finished the mug first, set it down on the shelf with the others, and then he looked. He took in everything in about 2 seconds. 3 men. Young, somewhere between 20 and 30. The one in front had a red cap turned backward on his head. The one on the left was heavyset, with a silver chain around his neck that caught the light from the overhead bulbs. The one on the right hung back a little, closer to the door, and his eyes were moving around the diner the way eyes move when someone is counting exits and watching for problems. Marcus set the cloth down on the counter. He had opened the diner at 5 that morning, same as every morning. He had made the first pot of coffee, unlocked the front door, turned the sign from closed to open, and sat down on the stool behind the counter for a few minutes before anyone arrived. Rex had been sleeping under the counter near the register, and Marcus had scratched the dog behind the ears without really thinking about it, the way you touch something familiar without needing to look at it. Rex was a German Shepherd, 8 years old, big through the chest and shoulders, with a coat the color of dark sand and black. He had been trained to the highest standard there was. He had worked in places most people had never heard of and would never visit. He had saved lives without knowing what saving a life meant in any language except the one his body understood. Now he slept under the counter of a diner in a small town in eastern Ohio and ate scrambled eggs on Saturday mornings because Marcus made too many and Rex never said no. The diner itself was nothing remarkable. 12 stools at the counter, 6 booths along the front window, a swinging door into the kitchen. The floor was black and white tile, worn smooth in the paths that people walked most often. There were 2 framed photographs on the wall near the register, one of the town taken from a hill somewhere in the 1950s, and one of a covered bridge that no longer existed. Marcus had not put them there. They had been on the wall when he bought the place, and he had left them because taking them down felt like work that did not need doing. He had owned the diner for 3 years. Before that, the 3 years are a story he did not tell anyone. Before those 3 years, there are 14 years that he does not think about during the day if he can help it and cannot stop thinking about at night no matter how tired he is. He was 39 years old. He had a small scar on his left jaw from something that had happened in a country he was not supposed to have been in. He walked with a very slight stiffness in his right knee when the weather turned cold. His hands were large and his knuckles were thick, and he had taught himself to hold them loose and open when he was behind the counter, because people got nervous around men who kept their hands closed. He had learned that about himself slowly, over the first few months after he left the military. He had learned it by watching people's faces when he walked into a room. There was a moment, sometimes, where something in their expression shifted, not fear exactly, but a kind of alertness, the way a small animal will pause when a larger one steps into its line of sight. He had not known he was doing it. He had been moving through his life the way he had been trained to move, and that was not the way regular people moved. He softened it. He slowed himself down. He smiled more, even when he did not feel like smiling. He learned to make small talk about the weather and the local football team and the price of eggs, and after a while the people who came into the diner stopped pausing when they saw him and started waving instead. He was good at the counter. Good at remembering how people took their coffee, good at knowing when someone wanted conversation and when they wanted to sit alone with their thoughts. He was not warm in the way that made people lean in and tell him their problems, but he was steady, and in a town where a lot of things had changed over the years and not much had changed for the better, steady was worth something. The regular morning crowd knew him well enough to know he was private. They did not push. They said good morning and thank you, and they tipped fairly, and they came back the next day, and that was the relationship, and it worked. There was one woman, Carol, who had a booth by the window every Tuesday and Thursday. She was somewhere in her late 60s, with white hair cut short and a habit of reading 3 newspapers at once, spreading them across the whole table like she was mapping a continent. She always ordered the same thing, 2 eggs over easy, rye toast, black coffee, and she always said the same thing when Marcus brought it to her, which was "You are a good man, Marcus," and he always said "Thank you, Carol," and neither of them meant it as a big thing, but it landed somewhere in him every time she said it, and he did not examine why. Rex liked Carol. He would walk over to her booth sometimes when the diner was quiet and put his big head on the seat beside her, and she would scratch between his ears and call him a handsome boy, and Rex would stand there with his eyes half closed looking like he had no opinion about anything in the world. That was most mornings. This evening was not most evenings. The man in the red cap stepped up to the counter. He looked at Marcus with the kind of look that is not really looking at a person but through them, the way someone looks at a door they are about to open. He put both hands flat on the counter. His nails were dirty. There was a tattoo on the back of his right hand that Marcus registered and filed away without changing his expression. "Register," the man said. That was all. One word. He did not ask. He did not explain. He put the word on the counter between them the way you put down a card you know beats everything else on the table. Marcus did not move. The heavy-set man with the silver chain had walked to the center of the diner. He was looking at the woman in the corner booth, who had now set her coffee down and was sitting very straight and very still. The old man at the end of the counter had folded his newspaper completely and placed it on the stool beside him with careful, precise movements, and he was looking at the surface of the counter. The third man, the one near the door, had not moved from his position. He was watching the room. Marcus measured all of this in the space between one breath and the next. "Register," the man in the red cap said again. He said it with a little more weight this time, the way you say something a second time when you want the other person to understand that the first time was not a suggestion. Marcus looked at him. His face was the same as it always was. Calm. Not aggressive, not afraid, just present, the way a wall is present. He reached under the counter. Not for the register. He brought up a glass and set it on the counter and pushed it across to the man. "You want water first?" Marcus said. The man in the red cap blinked. It was the smallest pause in the world. A fraction of a second. But Marcus caught it, and what it told him was that this man was used to people responding to the word register with shaking hands and open cash drawers, and a glass of water had not been part of any version of this evening he had planned for. Then the heavy-set man pulled a short black pistol from the waistband of his jeans and held it up where everyone in the diner could see it, and the moment for water was over. The woman in the corner booth made a small, sharp sound and pressed herself back against the wall of the booth. The old man at the counter did not make any sound at all. Rex stood up. He came out from under the counter without a sound, all 4 paws on the tile, and he looked at the heavy-set man with the gun the way a dog like Rex looks at something that has declared itself a threat. His head was level with his shoulders. His ears were forward. He was not growling. He did not need to. The heavy-set man saw Rex and turned the gun toward him. "Get that dog back," he said. Marcus said, "Rex. Here." Rex did not move. He was not disobeying. He was doing the thing he had been trained to do, which was to put himself between the person he was bonded to and the thing that threatened that person, and he had been doing that for 8 years in places far more dangerous than this diner, and the sight of a pistol held by a nervous man in a silver chain was not going to change that calculation. The man in the red cap turned around and saw Rex, and something moved in his face that he probably would not have described as fear but was close enough to it. He stepped back from the counter. He stepped back directly into Rex. And then everything moved very fast. Rex did what his training told him to do when contact was made with a potential threat that close, he moved. Not to bite, not yet, but to establish his presence in a way that was impossible to ignore, turning and pressing the full weight of his body against the man's legs, which was not a small amount of weight. The man in the red cap stumbled. He swung his arm down. The back of his elbow connected with the side of Rex's head with a heavy, dull sound that carried across the diner like something dropped. Rex hit the floor. He went down on his side and his legs moved once, twice, and then he was still. Marcus looked at Rex on the floor. He stood completely still behind the counter. The diner was silent in the way that only happens when every person in a room has stopped breathing at the same moment. The man in the red cap straightened up and looked at Marcus and said something, but Marcus was not listening to the words anymore. He was looking at Rex. Rex's sides were moving. He was breathing. But he was not getting up. Marcus picked up the cloth from the counter. He folded it in half. He set it back down. Then he came around the end of the counter, and the look on his face was the same look it had always been, calm, present, no aggression, no fear, and that look, which had always made the people of this small town feel comfortable and safe, was now the most dangerous thing in the room. Not one of the three men understood that yet. But they were about to. The man in the red cap pointed at Marcus and told him to stop. His voice had an edge to it that had not been there 30 seconds ago, a high, thin edge that comes when someone realizes that the thing they planned is not going the way it was planned. Marcus did not stop. He walked around the counter the way he walked to every table in this diner, every morning, every evening, every unremarkable hour of every unremarkable day, steady, unhurried, like a man who knows exactly where he is going and has all the time in the world to get there. The heavy-set man raised the pistol and aimed it at Marcus. "I said stop," the man in the red cap repeated. Marcus looked at the pistol. He looked at the man holding it. He was about 8 feet away now, standing in the open floor between the counter and the first row of booths. "Put the gun down," Marcus said. His voice was the same voice he used to tell people the soup of the day. Even. Unhurried. Completely clear. "You think I won't use this," the heavy-set man said. "I think you don't want to," Marcus said. "I think this was supposed to be quick and easy and you're standing here talking instead of leaving, which means you're already in a situation you didn't plan for. Put it down and walk out. That's the only version of tonight that ends well for you." There was a short silence. The old man at the counter had not moved. The woman in the corner booth was gripping the edge of the table with both hands. In the kitchen, the cook, whose name was Pete and who was 19 years old and had been working at the diner for 4 months, had his back flat against the wall beside the grill with his phone in his hand, already dialing. The man near the door had been silent this whole time. Now he spoke. "Enough," he said. "Do it and let's go." The heavy-set man looked at his partner. He looked back at Marcus. He made his decision. He moved the pistol to the left and aimed it at Rex, who was still on the floor, still breathing, not yet standing. "Last chance," he said. And something happened to the air in the room. It was not something anyone could have named exactly, but everyone in the diner felt it, even Pete behind the kitchen wall felt it, and he had not been watching. It was the way the atmosphere changes before a very large storm, a drop in pressure so sudden that your ears register it before your brain does. Marcus had gone still in a different way than before. Before, his stillness had been the stillness of a man choosing patience. This was something else. This was the stillness of a man who has made a decision and whose body is now simply waiting for the instructions to reach his hands. He had spent 14 years learning what to do with exactly this feeling. He had spent 3 years in this town trying never to need it again. Rex made a sound from the floor. Not a bark. A low, short sound, the kind Rex only made when he was in pain, and Marcus had heard it exactly 3 times in 8 years, once in a desert and once in a narrow street in a city that no longer looked like a city, and now here, on the black and white tile floor of a diner in eastern Ohio. The man near the door said now and took a step forward. Marcus moved. What happened in the next 70 seconds was not something the people in that diner would describe the same way twice, because they had all seen different parts of it from different angles and because the mind does not always store things clearly when it is running on fear. What they agreed on, when the police asked them later, was this: it was fast, it was quiet, and when it was over, all three men were on the floor. Marcus had not raised his voice once. He had not used a weapon. He had used the room, the distance between bodies, the angles, the weight and momentum of each man's own movement turned back on itself, in the way that only happens when someone has spent years reducing the human body to a set of physics problems that need solving under pressure. The heavy-set man had fired the pistol once. The bullet went into the ceiling. The gun was no longer in his hand before the sound of the shot had finished moving through the air. The man in the red cap went down second. He hit the floor between the counter and the first booth and did not get up. The man near the door was last, and he was the one who had given the orders, and Marcus dealt with him with the focused efficiency of someone finishing a task that needed finishing, and then he was down too. Silence. The diner smelled of coffee and gunpowder and something sharp and electric that had no name. Marcus stood in the center of the room and breathed. Once. Twice. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He had hoped, when he left the military, when he bought this diner, when he made the decision to become a man who dried mugs and made small talk about the weather, that he would never again be standing in a room that smelled like this, feeling his hands be steady in a way that other people's hands were not. He had not planned for it. He had not prepared for it. He had not kept himself sharp against the possibility of it the way some men do when they leave, spending weekends at shooting ranges and training gyms, keeping themselves ready for a world that might need what they could do. He had just wanted to be done. He crossed the room and knelt on the floor beside Rex. He did not look at the three men. He did not look at the civilians in the booths and at the counter. He did not go to the door or the window or reach for his phone. He put his hand on Rex's side and felt the movement of his breathing, and Rex turned his head and found Marcus's face with his eyes, and his tail moved once, slowly, along the floor. Marcus said something to him. Nobody else in the diner heard what it was. After a moment, Marcus stood up. He walked to the counter and picked up the white cloth he had set down there. He wiped his hands on it, slowly, the way he did every night when the last customer was gone and it was time to clean up and lock the door. Then he picked up the phone from under the counter and called for help. He gave the address. He said there had been a robbery attempt and that 3 individuals were on the floor and needed medical attention and that a police presence was needed. He was asked if anyone was seriously hurt. He said he did not believe so, but that his dog had been injured and needed a vet as soon as possible. The dispatcher seemed to hesitate at the dog part. Marcus said it again. Steady. Clear. The same voice. He set the phone down and looked at Carol, who was still in her booth, her 3 newspapers scattered on the floor around her feet. She was gripping her coffee cup with both hands. You all right? He said. She looked at him for a long moment. Marcus, she said. Who are you? He looked at her. His expression did not change. I own the diner, he said. Pete came out of the kitchen. He was pale and his hands were shaking and he looked at the 3 men on the floor and then at Marcus and then at Rex and then at Marcus again. Do you want me to Pete started? Put some more coffee on, Marcus said. These people have had a rough evening. Pete went back into the kitchen. Marcus went and sat on the floor beside Rex and waited for the sirens. The first officer through the door was a young woman named Laura Briggs, and she had been on the job for 2 years and had never walked into a scene like this one. She came in with her hand on her holster and her eyes moving fast across the room, and what she found was 3 men restrained with their own belts in a seated position against the support beam near the back wall, a diner full of very quiet and very shaken civilians, and one calm, large man sitting cross-legged on the floor next to a German shepherd, with a coffee cup on the floor beside him. Sir, she said, her hand still on her holster. Are you injured? No, Marcus said. Did you do this? She said, meaning the three men against the beam. Yes, he said. She looked at him. She looked at the three men. One of them had a swollen eye and was going to have a bruised jaw for a week. All three were conscious, but none of them were talking. The man who had been near the door was looking at Marcus with an expression that was hard to read, not anger, not exactly, but something closer to the look a person gets when they have understood something too late to be useful. Laura Briggs called it in and kept her eyes on Marcus. Can I see some identification? She said. Marcus reached into the back pocket of his jeans and produced a worn leather wallet. He handed her his driver's license. Marcus Hale. The address on it was this town. The photograph on it looked like him, 10 pounds lighter and with a shorter haircut. She wrote it down. More officers arrived. Then more. The small diner was suddenly full of people in uniform, and the civilians were being guided outside gently, with blankets and questions. Pete was standing by the kitchen door looking slightly dazed but unharmed. The old man at the counter was speaking very calmly to a young officer and pointing at things in the room, describing what had happened in the precise, measured way of someone who has worked hard to commit what he saw to memory. A detective arrived 40 minutes later. His name was Owen Grady, 53 years old, thick through the middle, with gray hair cut close on the sides and a look in his eyes that belonged to someone who had been surprised by enough things over the years to have stopped expecting surprises. He walked through the diner slowly, took in the scene, spoke quietly with Laura Briggs near the door, and then came and sat on the stool at the counter closest to where Marcus was still sitting on the floor beside Rex. He did not ask Marcus to stand up. He looked at Rex for a moment. "How's the dog?" he said. "Hurting," Marcus said. "He needs to see a vet." "We've got someone coming," Owen said. He pulled out a small notebook. He clicked his pen. He looked at Marcus. "Walk me through it," he said. Marcus did. Calmly, in order, without embellishment. He described what had happened from the moment the three men entered the diner to the moment he had called for help. He did not describe what he had done to the three men in the language of combat or training. He described it simply, in the way you describe a thing that needed doing. Owen listened. He wrote things down. When Marcus finished, Owen tapped his pen against the notebook a few times, looking at the ceiling. "You work in law enforcement," he said. "No," Marcus said. "Military?" A pause. Very short. "I was," Marcus said. Owen looked at him. "Which branch?" he said. "Navy," Marcus said. Owen wrote that down. He looked at it for a moment. He looked back at Marcus. "You want to be more specific," he said. Marcus looked at him without any change in his expression. "Not especially," he said. Owen Grady had been a detective for 21 years. He had interviewed a lot of people in those years, across a very wide range of circumstances, and he had a sense for when a person was hiding something out of guilt and when a person was choosing privacy for reasons that had nothing to do with guilt. These were different things and they felt different in a room. This felt like the second one. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. Over the next 2 hours, the scene was processed, the civilians were interviewed and released, and the three men were taken into custody. The vet arrived, a woman named Donna, small and efficient, who came through the door with a bag over her shoulder and knelt beside Rex without any preamble and began her examination. Marcus watched her work. Donna pressed along Rex's ribs gently, watching his breathing, checking his eyes and his gums and running her hands along his limbs. Rex was patient. He was always patient. Marcus sat beside them on the floor and did not look away. "2 cracked ribs," Donna said, after a few minutes. "Possibly a bruised lung. He needs to come with me tonight. I want imaging done." "Okay," Marcus said. "He's going to be all right," she said. She said it in the way that people say things when they mean them, not in the way they say them to make you feel better. He's very strong. Whatever condition he was in before tonight, he was in excellent shape. He always has been, Marcus said. Donna looked at Marcus. She had been a vet for 18 years and she had seen a lot of men with dogs, and she had learned, over time, to read the nature of a bond by the way it moved in a room. She could see the way Marcus watched Rex, the way you can see light coming through a window even if you're not looking directly at it. He knows you're here, she said. That helps more than anything I can give him tonight. She carefully loaded Rex onto a portable stretcher with the help of a young assistant who had arrived with her, and they carried him toward the door. At the threshold Rex turned his head and looked back at Marcus, and his tail moved once. I'll be there first thing, Marcus told him. He stood in the doorway and watched the van until it turned the corner at the end of the street. Then he went back inside and finished wiping down the counter. Owen Grady was still there, in the corner booth, working through his notes. He looked up when Marcus came back behind the counter. You don't have to do that tonight, he said. I know, Marcus said. He kept wiping. Owen watched him for a moment. Marcus Hale, he said, almost to himself. He looked down at his notebook. Navy. He tapped the pen again. He had a feeling, the way you get a feeling sometimes, that he was not done with this name. That before this was over he would know more about Marcus Hale than Marcus Hale wanted him to know. Not because anything was wrong, but because the way this man had put 3 armed individuals on the floor without using a weapon, without raising his voice, and without suffering any injury himself was not something that happened by accident or by luck or by any ordinary measure of toughness. This was something built over years in conditions Owen Grady would probably never be cleared to read about. He closed his notebook. We'll need you available for follow-up, he said. I'll be at the animal clinic at 7, Marcus said. After that, I'll be here. Owen stood up. He put his coat on. He walked to the door and stopped. You never answered my question earlier, he said. Which one? Marcus said. Specific branch of service, Owen said. You said Navy. I asked for specifics. Marcus set the cloth down on the counter. He looked at Owen. He said nothing. Owen held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, once, and walked out. Marcus stood alone in the diner. The overhead lights hummed. The coffee in the pot on the burner had gone thick and dark from sitting too long. The bullet hole in the ceiling was small and clean and would need to be patched. The tile floor had been swept by one of the officers at some point during the processing, and there was no longer anything on it to show what had happened here. Marcus poured the old coffee down the drain. He rinsed the pot. He set it back on the burner and started a fresh one, because the morning shift started in a few hours and there would be people coming through that door expecting coffee and eggs and the same steady man they always found behind the counter. He intended to be there. He leaned against the counter with his arms folded and listened to the coffee begin to percolate, and the sound was familiar and ordinary and exactly what he needed, and he stood like that for a long time in the quiet of his diner, waiting for morning. The morning was gray and cold when Marcus pulled into the parking lot of the animal clinic at 7:07. He had not slept. He had gone home for a few hours, showered, changed his clothes, and sat at the small table in his kitchen with a mug of coffee that he mostly did not drink. He had looked at the chair in the corner of the kitchen where Rex's blanket was, and the chair had been very empty. He had arrived at the clinic before Donna. He sat in his truck and waited. Donna arrived at 7:10 with a travel mug in one hand and her keys in the other. She saw his truck in the lot and came directly to his window. He made it through the night well, she said, before he could ask. Better than I expected, honestly. He's sore and he'll be sore for a while, but his lung is holding and his vitals are good. Marcus looked at her. Can I see him? He said. That's why you're here, she said. Rex was in a recovery kennel in the back of the clinic, lying on a thick foam mat with a heating pad under a thin blanket. He had an 4 in his foreleg, bandaging around his midsection, and he was awake. When Marcus came through the door of the recovery room, Rex's ears came forward and his tail began to move slowly against the mat. Marcus sat down on the floor outside the kennel and put his hand through the wire mesh, and Rex pressed his nose against Marcus's palm. Donna stood in the doorway for a moment and watched, and then she went back to the front of the clinic and gave them some privacy. Marcus did not talk for a while. He just sat there with his hand through the mesh and let Rex breathe against it. The clinic was quiet this early. There were a few other animals in the recovery room, a cat and a cone, a small dog sleeping hard after some kind of surgery, and the only sounds were breathing and the low hum of the heating unit. After a while Marcus said, "You were right to stand up." Rex's tail moved. "You've always been right about that," Marcus said. "There is a particular kind of man who will say things to an animal that he would never say to another human being. Not because the animal understands the words, but because the words need to go somewhere, and the animal is the only thing in the room that will hold them without turning them into a conversation." Marcus was that kind of man. He sat with Rex for 2 hours. At 9:30, his phone rang. It was Owen Grady. "You at the clinic?" Owen said. "Yes," Marcus said. "How's the dog?" "He'll be okay." A short pause on the line. "I need to ask you to come to the station when you have a chance," Owen said. "Not urgent. This morning if it works, otherwise this afternoon." "I can come now," Marcus said. He told Rex he would be back before dark. He said it the way you say something to someone you know is listening, and he drove to the station. The station was a single-story brick building 2 blocks from the center of town. Marcus had driven past it dozens of times in 3 years and had never gone inside. He sat across a small table from Owen Grady in an interview room that smelled of bad coffee and dry air, and Owen had a folder in front of him that had not been there the night before. "I made some calls this morning," Owen said. Marcus did not respond. "You were not easy to find information about," Owen said. "I want you to know that. We ran your name, got your license, your address, the business registration for the diner. Nothing unusual. No record. Came up clean." "Okay," Marcus said. "Then I called a contact of mine," Owen said. "A man I worked with years ago who went into federal service. Just as a courtesy call. Told him what had happened, mentioned your name." Owen paused. He went quiet. Marcus looked at the table. "He said he couldn't tell me much," Owen continued. "What he could tell me was that your service record exists, it's current, and that the parts of it he was able to access were about 40% blacked out with permanent marker." The room was very quiet. "He said to tell you he respects what you did," Owen said. "Last night, I mean. Not the other stuff." Marcus nodded. Owen opened the folder. Inside there was a single printed photograph, taken from what looked like a local news website. It was a photograph of the outside of the diner, taken sometime during the night when there were still police vehicles outside. The caption read, "Owner neutralizes armed robbery attempt." "The story got out," Owen said. "Last night. Someone from the diner posted about it. This morning it's on a lot of local pages. By this afternoon it'll be picked up by bigger outlets." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Can you stop it?" he said. Owen looked at him. He was not unkind about it. "No," he said. Marcus leaned back in the chair. Owen said, "Is there anything you want me to know? About who you are, your background, your reasons for being in this town?" "Not legally. Just so I understand what I'm dealing with." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I was in the Navy for 14 years. Special operations. I did things I was asked to do and I did them as well as I knew how. I got out because I needed to get out. I bought the diner because I needed something ordinary. I'm not hiding from anything. I'm not in trouble. I'm not dangerous to anyone in this town." He stopped. Rex served with me, he said. Military working dog. We finished at the same time. They were going to retire him to a kennel program. I asked to take him. Owen looked at him. They let you, he said. Eventually, Marcus said. Owen was quiet for a moment. He closed the folder. 14 years, he said. Special operations. Yes, Marcus said. Owen nodded slowly. He did not ask for more. He had heard enough to know that more was not something he was going to get, and he had been at this job long enough to understand that some answers are contained in the shape of the silence around them. The three men from last night, Owen said, returning to the practical. The one with the gun, his name is Gary Pollard, 26. The heavy one is Calvin Brown, 28. The one near the door is Elliot Crane, 31. Crane's the one with a record. B&E, aggravated robbery 2 years ago in another county. He did 18 months. Marcus listened. They're going to be charged, Owen said. Robbery, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during a felony. Crane will likely see significant time. The others, depending on their lawyers, may be less. But all three are looking at serious consequences. The gun, Marcus said. Unregistered, Owen said. Stolen from a house 3 towns over, about 4 months ago. Marcus nodded. He was quiet for a moment. The people in the diner, he said. The woman in the corner booth. The old man at the counter. Are they all right? All interviewed last night, all released, Owen said. Nobody physically hurt except the dog. He paused. And the 3 individuals who came in. They'll be okay, Marcus said. It was not a question, and it was not gloating. It was the statement of a man who had made a calculation the night before about how much force to use and had made it very carefully. Owen believed him. One more thing, Owen said. He reached into the folder and produced a small card. It was plain white with a name and a number on it. He slid it across the table. This is from my contact. The federal one. He said if you ever want to make a call, that number goes somewhere useful. Marcus looked at the card. He did not pick it up. I appreciate it, he said. He left the card on the table. By the end of the second day, the story had moved past the local news websites and onto larger platforms. By the end of the third day, it had spread in the way that certain stories spread, not because anyone pushed it, but because it had the particular shape of something people wanted to share. A quiet man in a small town. 3 armed men. A German shepherd named Rex. Marcus heard about it from Pete, who showed him a screenshot on his phone during the Thursday morning shift. You're famous, Pete said. He seemed genuinely delighted by this, in the way that 19-year-olds are sometimes delighted by things that older people find exhausting. Put your phone away, Marcus said. But there are like 400,000 views on this one video alone, Pete said. Someone who was in the booth recorded part of it on their phone. You can't really see what happens, but you can hear it, Anne. Pete, Marcus said. Pete put his phone away. The diner, which normally saw a steady but modest flow of regulars and occasional travelers passing through, was unusually busy that week. People who had never been there before came in and sat at the counter and looked around, and some of them asked Marcus directly if he was the one from the news story, and he told them he did not know what they were talking about, and he poured their coffee and took their order and was exactly as he had always been, and most of them left somewhat unsatisfied and tipped very well. Carol came in on the Tuesday following the incident and sat in her booth and spread her newspapers across the table and ordered her eggs and her toast and her black coffee, and when Marcus brought it to her she looked up at him. I have been sitting in this booth for a long time, she said. Tuesdays and Thursdays. More years than I care to count, actually, at various diners in various towns, but the last 3 years at this one. I know, Marcus said. And I have always been a good judge of people, she said. It's the thing I am most proud of, honestly. My children would say my garden, but they are wrong, it's my judgment of people. Marcus waited. I knew you were not an ordinary man, Carol said. From the first week. There's something about the way you move through a room. Like you're always counting something that no one else can see. Marcus looked at her. I just didn't know what it was, she said. Now I know. She picked up her fork. I'm glad you were there. She cut into her eggs. That was all she said about it. Marcus went back behind the counter. Rex came home from the clinic on the 5th day. Donna drove him herself, which Marcus had not expected. She pulled into the small driveway beside the house Marcus rented 2 blocks from the diner and helped carry Rex inside on a padded stretcher, and they settled him on his blanket in the corner of the kitchen with his water bowl and his heating pad and his cone, which he did not like but accepted with the patience that defined him. Donna left instructions and a phone number and told Marcus to call her if anything changed at any hour, and she said it with the firmness of someone who meant it. When she left, Marcus sat down on the kitchen floor beside Rex and did not get up for a long time. Rex slept. Marcus watched him sleep. He thought about the question Carol had asked him that first night in the diner, after everything was over and the room smelled like coffee and everything that had come before coffee. Who are you? He did not have a clean answer to that question. He did not think he ever would. He was a man who had been trained to do things that most people would not believe if he described them, and he had done those things, and he had come home changed in ways that he was still learning the shape of, and he had found a town and a counter and a routine and a dog, and for 3 years that had been enough. He did not want to be a story. He did not want to be on a news website or a social media page or the subject of anyone's admiration or curiosity. He had not acted the way he acted that night because he was a hero. He had acted that way because Rex was on the floor and he had known what to do and he had done it, and that was the whole of it. But there was the look on the face of the young woman in the corner booth when the last police car had driven away and she had walked to her car in the parking lot and looked back at the diner. Relief so complete that it changed the shape of her face. There was Pete in the kitchen, 19 years old and unhurt, making coffee on a stove that might have looked very different to him tonight if Marcus had not been on the other side of that counter. There was the old man who had pressed Marcus's hand before he left and said, with a directness that old people sometimes have, "Thank you, son." He was not interested in being thanked. But he was not indifferent to it either. That was the complicated part. The part he was still working out. Rex shifted in his sleep and made a soft sound, and Marcus put his hand on his side and felt the slow, even movement of his breathing, and the sound of it was the best sound Marcus had heard in days. "You're going to be fine," he said. Rex's tail moved once without him waking up. Marcus leaned his head back against the kitchen cabinet. Outside, the town was quiet. The diner was closed for the night, but the sign in the window was lit up, the one that said open, because Marcus had forgotten to turn it off when he left. He realized he would have to go back and turn it off, or leave it on, and in that moment he could not decide which, and the inability to decide felt like the most ordinary problem he had had in a week, and that, at least, felt like a beginning. He stayed on the floor with Rex for another hour. Then he stood up, pulled on his jacket, and walked the 2 blocks back to the diner in the dark to turn off the sign. He stopped at the door. Someone had taped something to the outside of the front window. A handmade card, folded from plain white paper. On the front, in blue marker, in a child's handwriting, it said, "Thank you for protecting everyone." There was a small drawing of a dog beside the words. Marcus stood on the sidewalk and read it. The cold air moved through the street. The town was still. A single streetlight threw an orange circle on the pavement a few feet away, and everything outside that circle was dark and soft and quiet. He stood there for a long time. He unlocked the door, went inside, and turned off the sign. He locked the door behind him and walked home in the dark with his hands in his pockets, and the card was still on the window, and it would be there in the morning, and by the morning there would be others beside it, pressed and taped and pinned by people who would not explain themselves and did not need to, people who simply wanted the man behind that counter to know that he was seen. Not as a weapon. Not as a legend. Not as a story to be shared and clicked and passed around. As a person who had been in the right place, had done the right thing, and had gone back to feeding a dog and wiping down a counter, because that was who he had chosen to be. And in a world that had taken a great deal from him and would take more still if he let it, that choice, ordinary, stubborn, daily, was the one thing that remained entirely his own.